It started on a chilly Saturday afternoon. The lights inside the Madison Square Garden were bright, the crowd loud and excited. It was a big charity event, an evening of fun MMA sparring matches to raise money for veterans and first responders. Celebrities, fighters, and fans filled every seat. But then, something changed. A young MMA fighter named Cole Matthews stood in the center of the ring. He was strong, fast, and full of himself. At only 27, he had already won 3 national titles. He walked with a swagger, wearing sunglasses under the arena lights. Suddenly, the announcer called out a special guest, Jason Statham, 57, the British actor known for his roles in The Transporter and The Expendables. He wasn't expected to fight, just to support the cause. But Cole laughed out loud. What's he gonna do? Throw movie punches? He mocked, loud enough for everyone to hear. The crowd chuckled awkwardly. Jason just stood there quietly. For a moment it felt like the whole arena turned cold. Nobody knew. This was the start of something unforgettable, something that would silence even the loudest soul. Cole Matthews raised a microphone and pointed at Jason. "Come on, movie star," he said. "Let's give these old folks a show. I'll go easy on you." Laughter rippled through the arena. Jason didn't smile. He didn't scowl either. He simply walked to the ring, calm and quiet, like a man who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. Jason had trained in real martial arts for over 30 years. He wasn't just an actor. He had studied kickboxing, Wing Chun, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He had fought in real street fights. He knew discipline. He knew silence. As Jason stepped into the ring, Cole leaned toward the crowd. "This'll be quick. Watch me humble Hollywood." The bell rang, but for the next 10 seconds, nobody moved. Jason stood still, hands open, eyes locked on Cole. Cole danced around, trying to show off. Then with a single step, Jason shifted. What happened next was not loud or flashy. It was beautiful, like a master artist picking up a brush. The crowd gasped. One old man in the front row clutched his chest, whispering, "My God, he's not acting." Jason moved like water. With one smooth motion, he blocked Cole's flashy punch, spun behind him, and tapped him lightly on the back of the neck. Cole stumbled forward, shocked. "Was that it?" He laughed. Jason said nothing. Then, faster than anyone could blink, Jason's foot swept under Cole's legs, bringing him to the mat gently, but firmly. It was not an attack. It was a lesson. The crowd went silent. A woman in the third row began to cry. She had seen her late husband teach self-defense to kids the same way. Gentle but strong. Patient but powerful. Cole sat up, humiliated. He looked around and saw thousands of older veterans watching. Some were wounded. Some wore medals. They weren't cheering. They were watching with respect. Jason stepped back, giving Cole space. Then he whispered, "You don't fight for pride. You fight for purpose." Those words hit harder than any punch. Cole blinked. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. And Jason? He just stood there, like a quiet mountain, unshaken. The real fight had only just begun. In the third row sat Walter Jennings, 84 years old. He was a retired Marine, lost a leg in Vietnam, lost his wife 3 years ago. He barely spoke these days. But when Jason swept Cole to the mat, Walter leaned forward. His lips trembled. He whispered, "That's not acting. That's purpose." His granddaughter wiped a tear from his cheek. "Grandpa, are you okay?" He nodded slowly. "I haven't seen a man move like that since Nam. He's not fighting the boy. He's teaching him." On the mat, Cole stood up again. His face was red, but not from pain, from shame. Jason didn't gloat. He didn't mock. He bowed. It was small, just a dip of the head. But to Walter it felt like a prayer, a moment of honor. The camera caught Walter's tears. The crowd saw him on the big screen, gently sobbing, and the arena grew even more silent. This was no longer about a fight. It was about something else, something deeper. a lesson the world had forgotten. Cole wiped sweat from his brow. He was breathing harder now, not from the fight but from something heavier. He looked into Jason's eyes. They weren't angry. They were kind and tired. Not the kind of tired from training, but the tiredness of a man who has carried the weight of the world, quietly, for years. Jason stepped forward again, slow, measured. He didn't throw a punch. Instead, he opened his hand and whispered, "Let me show you something." Cole didn't move. Jason reached down and lifted his shirt slightly. A long scar ran across his ribs. Not from a stunt, not from a movie. "I was stabbed in Paris 2004, Jason said softly, trying to stop a man from hurting a woman. The crowd gasped. Most had never heard that story. Cole's mouth dropped open. "You really did that?" Jason nodded. "I've never been paid to fight. I get paid to act. But I've bled for strangers. That's what being a man is." In the crowd, an elderly couple held hands. The woman whispered, "He's not just a movie star. He's real." And Cole? For the first time in his life, he looked small. Up in row 9, a woman named Eleanor sat with her hands clasped. She was 73. Her husband had died 10 years ago. Her son, a police officer, was killed in the line of duty. She hadn't smiled in years. But tonight, something changed. She watched Jason bow, watched him speak softly to a young man full of pride. And she began to cry, not from sadness but from something else. Hope. "I see my son in him," she whispered. "In both of them." The camera didn't catch Eleanor's face, but those around her did. A young girl beside her reached over and held her hand. In the ring, Jason stepped back again. Cole didn't mock this time. He didn't laugh. He asked a question no one expected. "Will you teach me?" Jason looked at him, slowly nodded. "Yes. But first you have to listen." The entire arena fell still. Not a single cough. Not a whisper. It was like the air itself had paused. In that moment, everyone forgot about the cameras, the lights, and the show. All that remained was a student and a teacher. Cole lowered his fists. He didn't know why, but his heart was pounding. Not from fear, but from something heavier. Shame. All around him, people were quiet. No one laughed anymore. No one cheered. Jason didn't speak loudly. He didn't gloat. He simply stood still, calm like a soldier who had seen too much. Cole looked at Jason's face. There were small lines near his eyes. The kind of lines only made by pain, not age. Jason wasn't angry. He was sad. And that broke something inside Cole. He had mocked a man who had saved lives, who had bled for strangers. He had mocked a man who didn't need to fight to prove anything. Jason stepped closer and placed a hand on Cole's shoulder. "Real strength," he said, "isn't loud. It's quiet. It shows up when no one's watching." In the front row, an elderly woman covered her mouth and wept. She had lost her son in Afghanistan. Jason's words felt like they were coming straight from heaven. Cole couldn't hold it anymore. His lips trembled. His knees felt weak. And for the first time in his adult life, he whispered, "I'm sorry." Jason nodded, but didn't speak. He let Cole feel it, really feel it. The silence, the weight. Up in Section 103, a man named Frank Delaney, 90, sat quietly in a wheelchair. He was a World War II vet, almost fully blind now. He couldn't see the ring clearly, but he heard everything. And the way Jason spoke, the calm, the power. It reminded Frank of his captain, lost at sea in 1944, a man who taught with kindness, fought with honor, died with courage. Frank turned to the nurse beside him and whispered, "That man, he has the same soul." In the ring, Cole wiped his face. No longer cocky, just quiet. Jason finally broke the silence. "Who taught you to fight like that?" Cole asked. Jason looked into the crowd. "My father," he said, "a street cleaner, died when I was 17. He never had much, but he had dignity." The arena was frozen. Somewhere in the back, a veteran took off his hat. A young boy held his grandfather's hand tighter. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a story of fathers, of sacrifice, of men the world forgot, but should never have. The ref leaned in, unsure whether to end the match. Jason raised his hand and shook his head. "No need," he said. "We've both already won." But Cole wasn't done. Not with fists, but with something else, his heart. "I came here to show off," Cole said, voice breaking. "But I ended up seeing something I've never seen before." The microphone picked it up. The entire arena heard. "I saw a real man." The crowd was silent. Then, from the upper section, a voice yelled, "He's telling the truth." It was a teenager. He stood beside his grandfather. The old man was crying. Jason gave a small bow to the boy. Then Cole turned back to Jason and asked the one question no one expected. "Can I hug you?" Jason didn't hesitate. He opened his arms, and in front of thousands of people, the cocky fighter dropped his pride and hugged the man who had just humbled him without cruelty. The crowd stood. No cheers, just tears. Even the cameras struggled to focus through the lens, fogging with emotion. And somewhere in the noise a prayer was whispered. "Lord, let more men be like this." The hug ended, but the silence remained. Jason stepped back from Cole, his eyes misty now. People in the front rows noticed. His hands were slightly shaking. One reporter whispered, "He's crying." Cole gently asked, "Was it your father who taught you how to fight?" Jason looked down, took a long breath. "No," he said. "Not just him. There was someone else." The lights above flickered, almost as if the arena itself paused. Jason looked into the crowd, searching for something, or someone. "She was a nurse," he said quietly. "Her name was Ruth." He closed his eyes, then opened them again. "She was my mother. She worked 2 jobs, cleaned hospital floors. She once fought off 2 men who tried to rob her outside a clinic, with nothing but her umbrella." A soft laugh escaped the crowd, but Jason's next words wiped away every smile. "She died in my arms," he said. "At 61, a heart attack. I had just made my first big movie. She never saw it." His voice cracked. "I would trade every film just to have her back." The arena felt cold again. Even the cameras stopped moving. And in the 9th row, Eleanor wept openly. After the story, Cole sat down on the mat. He looked smaller than before. Not weaker, but gentler. Jason turned his back to the crowd for a moment. He pulled up his left sleeve. There, just below his shoulder, was a small tattoo. It read one word: Ruth. The crowd gasped softly. It wasn't new. It had faded with time, but the love behind it had not. A man in the audience leaned over to his wife and whispered, "That's real. That's not Hollywood." Cole stared at the tattoo. He whispered, "She raised a warrior." Jason nodded, his voice low. "She raised a man." Then he looked up into the crowd, voice firm but warm. "To everyone out there who lost someone, your love never leaves you. It moves through you. It becomes your strength." An older man stood up and saluted. A woman placed her hand over her heart. A teenager began to cry without knowing why. Jason turned to Cole. "You asked me to teach you," he said. "Lesson 1. Honor the people who shaped you, even if they're no longer here." Cole nodded, tears running down his cheeks. And in that moment, he became a student again. Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. He held it gently, like it could break. "This," he said, "was the last letter I wrote to my mother, but she died before she could read it." He unfolded it slowly, and then, without warning, he read it aloud. "Dear Mom, I made it, not because of luck or fame or talent, but because of you. You cleaned hospital floors while I trained. You fed me when you were hungry. I never forgot. I never will. I promise I'll always carry you in every fight, every word, every breath. His voice cracked. Thank you. I love you. Always. Jason. By now, people in the arena were wiping their eyes. Men who hadn't cried in years broke down. Women clutched their chests. Cole was kneeling. Even the cameramen lowered their equipment. The lights softened. No music, no cheering, just hearts breaking and healing. Jason looked up at the sky, and for a second, many swore they felt it, the presence of something greater, not just strength, but love. Jason folded the letter and placed it gently in his jacket. The crowd remained silent, as if even breathing would ruin the moment. Cole cleared his throat, eyes still red. I have a little brother, he said softly. His name's Liam. He's 10. He has autism. Barely speaks. Jason nodded slowly. Cole continued, voice shaking. I train hard so I can give him a better life. But I never talk about him. I didn't want to seem soft. Jason stepped closer. You thought being strong meant hiding your heart, Jason said. But real strength is love without fear. The crowd felt that line like thunder. In the back row, an elderly woman gasped and whispered, My son used to say that before he went to war. Cole pulled out a photo from his locker and held it up to the camera. It was Liam, smiling wide, holding a toy truck. Jason touched the photo gently. Then he whispered, You fight for him, not your pride. Cole fell to his knees. He wasn't hurt. He was changed. And the crowd? They stood, not to cheer, but to honor a moment that felt sacred. The match was long over, but no one left their seat. Jason helped Cole to his feet, and together they bowed to the crowd. Then slowly they walked toward the back tunnel. That's when it happened. An old security guard stepped forward. Gray hair, crooked back, missing a finger. He raised his hand. I saw you fight in London. Real fight. Back in '98, saved a kid from a gang, he said. Jason paused. His face went still. I never told anyone, the man added. But that kid was my nephew. You saved his life. Jason closed his eyes. The moment hit him like a wave. He remembered the alley, the fear, the blood. And then, the whisper came from the man. God bless you, Jason. You never stopped being a protector. Cole looked at Jason in awe. How many lives have you saved? He asked. Jason didn't answer. He simply walked on, head bowed. The crowd didn't know this part, but now, they did. Jason wasn't just a movie star. He was a man who had quietly fought darkness behind the scenes, and the world had finally seen the light. As Jason walked backstage, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. It was a girl, maybe 7 or 8. She held something wrapped in a handkerchief. My grandma asked me to give this to you, the little girl whispered. Jason knelt down. What's your name? Grace. Jason smiled gently. That's a good name. He opened the cloth. Inside was a silver cross, worn and weathered. She wore it every day for 40 years, Grace said. She passed last spring, said if I ever saw someone who still had honor in this world, I should give it to them. Jason didn't speak. He looked at the cross, then kissed it gently. Then he turned to Grace and whispered, I don't deserve this, but I will carry it for her. The little girl nodded, then hugged him tight. Someone snapped a photo, but this was not for headlines. It was for hearts. In the crowd, people were openly crying now. Older men held tissues, women whispered prayers. No one had expected this tonight. They came for a fight. But instead, they had witnessed something holy. Back in the arena, the lights were still on. No one had left. The announcers had long stopped speaking. The music had faded. Even the screens had gone black. But no one moved. It was like they were all waiting for something. Or maybe they were afraid to break the silence. Jason returned to the edge of the ring with Cole by his side. A young boy in the crowd shouted, "Jason, you're my hero." Jason turned, smiled gently, and raised his hand, but instead of waving, he pointed to the crowd. "No," he said, "the heroes are out there, the nurses, the soldiers, the grandparents, the quiet ones." His voice echoed through the quiet room like a bell in a church, and then the crowd rose to their feet, not for applause, not for noise, but for a standing tribute to humility, to love, to the strength of silent warriors who walk among us. In the back, a veteran whispered, "I've been waiting for a moment like this my whole life." And just like that, the real fight was won. Cole stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Jason, I came here to prove something, but you proved everything." He reached into his gym bag and pulled out a belt, a championship belt he'd won just 6 months ago. "I fought hard for this," he said, "but I don't want it anymore." Jason looked confused. "Why?" "Because you taught me that the real champions wear their scars on the inside." He placed the belt on Jason's shoulder. Jason looked down at it, then at the young man who now stood humbled before him. Then he did something no one expected. He turned to the crowd and handed the belt to a young man in a wheelchair, a 14-year-old boy who had lost his legs in a car crash. "You're stronger than all of us," Jason whispered. The boy broke down crying. So did his mother. So did half the arena. Cole whispered, "That boy will never forget this." Jason nodded, his voice low. "Neither will I." And just like that, he passed the torch. Not with pride, but with purpose. The event ended, but nobody forgot. Weeks later, that photo of Jason hugging the little girl with the cross went viral. The world saw not just a star, but a servant. Cole left the spotlight. He opened a gym for kids with special needs, named it Liam's Hope. Jason disappeared for a while. No interviews, no shows, just peace. Until one day, an old video surfaced. It showed him training in silence, a candle burning nearby, the silver cross on a chain around his neck. The video ended with his voice. "Fame fades, but kindness stays lit." People across the world shared that clip, in retirement homes, in churches, in small homes where grandmothers sat with tissues in their hands whispering, "That's what a real man looks like." And tonight, as you sit watching this, if it touched you, if it reminded you of someone you lost, if it made you cry or smile or feel something you haven't felt in years, then please, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share in the comments who your real-life hero is. Because sometimes, the softest voices leave the loudest echoes. Thank you for watching.